The channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and I'm a musician from Northport, New York. And I have the special guest Saige Jones from Saige Jones Podcast here on the channel. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. This is gonna be a really cool conversation. It's kind of a conversation that's been kind of been talked about for a bit of time now. I mean, I met you officially. I mean, we ended up going to high school together. I don't know if you know that, but you were a couple years ahead of me. So I recognized you when I saw you in Starbucks at one time, and then we just ended up chatting. And you have a really interesting podcast that I think would be a really cool thing to share here on this channel. So for people that are not familiar with who you are, can you introduce yourself?
Thanks. Yeah, as far as the going to high school together, I think you had mentioned that when we first met, and but I know I recognized your wife when we connected on Instagram because she went to
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I think like you're jogging my memory, but I think I knew that.
Yeah.
But, yes, hi, I'm Saige, Saige Jones, but Saige is fine. And I do have a podcast. And guess what it's called? The Saige Jones Podcast.
You know what? It's easy to remember then. You'll never
Yeah,
forget it.
yeah, it's easy to remember. People say like sometimes it's harder to brand something with your name, sometimes it's easier, but I called my in high school, I mean, I'm sorry, in college, I called my radio show Saige Jones Radio. So it just made sense for me. So that's what I went with. And yeah, I'm from Northport, New York, Long Island, New York, and have been in media and radio for pretty much since college. So kind of made sense for me to start a podcast. And I don't
Yeah.
know if you want me to add anything else to my intro, but I'm so used to being on that side of things. So I don't want to like
No, that's totally
say too much.
fine. I'm here to listen to you and your story. That's funny though. I understand highly what you said. Like whenever you're being interviewed or I'm being interviewed by somebody, it's like, oh, like I'm always on the other side. So like you kind of like almost start to take over the interview, and I'm like not saying you're doing that in any way. So I know the feeling though. So don't worry. I'm totally fine with that. Take over as much as you want. It just leads for a better conversation.
Yeah.
So what is the Sage Shows podcast?
So my podcast is focused on positive and motivating stories. So it's kind of like therapy for me in a sense and motivation for me. So it's a little bit selfish. Actually, in one of my episodes that I released I think 2 episodes ago, my guest Psych, when I had described this to him, he was like, you should call it Self-Absorbed with Sage. And obviously we were joking, but in a sense it is really for me. But the idea is if it helps me, then my hope is that it'll help other people. And it can be from entrepreneurs to people who are just kind of dealing with, can we curse on here or no?
You just be you. You be you.
Okay. People
I
who are
don't.
dealing with challenging situations and doing it like a boss, or people who are even just like still figuring it out. Like I'm very much still figuring it out. So
Sure.
I've kind of realized that I'm putting myself in the pot of people who are just being honest about where they're at and what they're figuring out and stuff. So I mean, I could give you more examples of people I've talked to, but ultimately it could be from entrepreneurs to people just figuring it out to mental health to, it's pretty much just like what is this life and how can we make the most of it? How could we be successful? How could we be successful at work, in our personal endeavors, and in our personal challenges?
Yeah, it's super fascinating. And I was scrolling through some of the people, the list of the people you've had on the podcast, and there's this guy I've seen floating around the internet, and that you ended up having him on his podcast, your podcast, the I think it's a 10K friend. Can you? I don't remember the name, but what was the name?
Yeah, Rob's 10K Friends is his project,
Yes.
and I think people call him that, but his name is technically Rob Lawless.
Okay, yes. And I was like, oh, that guy, like, I've seen him floating around just in the general, like, I don't know where, just on Instagram and just all this stuff. But you had him on your podcast. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Like, how did that happen? And can you explain what he's up to these days? Like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I can connect you, and you could potentially be a friend of his. He calls me.
Yeah,
Well, I'm a big believer in that. Like, you have to help. We're all trying to figure it out. We're all trying to make it in whatever way.
exactly.
So I can definitely make that
I
connection.
appreciate that.
Yeah, but he so I had also seen him floating around the internet. He asked me the other day. He asked me because I was just on his project now. We recorded last week, and one of the questions he asked me was, "How did you find my page?" And I was like, I think you just somehow popped up. Like the way you phrased it, floating around the internet, is perfect, because I don't really know, but somehow it popped up for me. But I went to Penn State and he went to Penn State, and I'm 98.9% sure that I recognize his face from just walking around campus. He was 2 years older than me. So I think it was last summer I had found him floating around the internet, and I DM'd him just like, hey, I would love to have you on my podcast. And I hadn't heard back from him. And I also understand that with people who have a little bit of a following, even a small following, it's hard to go through your DMs and see
you get a lot of messages,
like the message requests and stuff. So anyway, then fast forward to, I don't know, maybe March of this year, 2021, I had put up an Instagram story saying, hey, if you know anyone with a cool story or someone who's doing something awesome, let me know. I would love to talk to them. And this girl, Jen, had responded to my story and said, I know someone, and she tagged him. And I was like, and I clicked on his page and I clicked message. I was like, actually, I messaged him, almost a year ago. And she was like, I'm going to push this through for you. And so I don't even think he had opened my DM. He probably hadn't even seen it. And he was super cool. He was like, yeah, I'm willing to be on. And he was like, you know what, if we can bang out your podcast and my project, great. But we didn't have enough time for his, so we waited a little while and we just finally recorded his.
But that's cool though, because like that I wanted to give an example of some of the stuff that you do on your podcast. So like he's doing his project where he's trying to, I think 1 hour interviews with 10,000 people, right, or something like that.
Yeah. Sorry, that was the other part of what you asked. Also, by the way, I don't see it saying recording. You're definitely good on your end, right?
Yeah, we're live streaming actually to YouTube. Did I forget to mention that? Yeah.
Got it. So it's on. I didn't know, but that's fine.
I think a lot of people end up saying this, and maybe I need to be a little bit more clear about that in the pre-chat.
But I'm just used to it saying recording.
Yeah.
I
appreciate the heads up.
Yeah, no problem. That's like one of my biggest fears, is sitting with someone and afterwards being like, we didn't actually record that.
Oh man, I hear you. I mean, I on a funny story, just a complete side note. Last night, I helped out a friend and filmed part of their wedding last night, and there was like something with my SD card, and I had almost a heart attack. That I like pretty much everything up until like the champagne toast. So it's like I thought there was an issue and like got deleted on the SD card, and I almost like died. I was like, they're gonna kill me. Like, what am I gonna? I'm just gonna have to refund all the money and everything.
Terrible feeling, but it was fine.
It was fine. Yeah.
Okay.
I had a heart attack though in the meantime.
So this was me looking out for you. But
I appreciate that.
Got it all locked in.
Appreciate that. So,
but what was the other part of the question about him that I never answered?
No. So I wanted to give an example of some of the stuff that you do on the podcast, and so your goal is essentially to kind of connect people and show people that like we're all kind of figuring things out, and inspire yourself and other people that life is worth figuring out, and everybody's figuring out on their own journey, essentially, right?
Yeah, because we all go through shit, and some of us are going through hard things and some of us are doing really freaking cool things.
Yeah. So
why not share that with everyone and talk about what's working and what's not working, or just talk about the shit you're going through,
So what are some of the ways that you end up so let's get a little practical in that sense, because I'm curious how everybody starts these in different ways. How did you end up starting your podcast? For the people that might want to start a podcast, but haven't yet, like maybe we can get a little more on the technical side. I'm curious, and share that, because I think that so often people I have this really cool idea, but I just don't even know where to go with it. You know what I mean? So if you'd be able to elaborate on that.
Well, researching is the first thing. But even that's hard, because you could do research, and like we said before, I think it was before we started going live, but I asked you about your camera, like you could do research, but 10 different articles could tell you 100 different great cameras. Yeah. So it's hard to know. But on the actual technical side, the way I started was I kind of narrowed it down to okay, I knew I wasn't gonna have one studio. I wanted to be able to move around.
Cool.
So that kind of narrowed down, that cut out whatever equipment was not mobile, or not easily mobile. And then from there, my go-to place is B&H in New York City. I think there's only one. I think it's only a New York based sort of like, it's almost like a Target, but for like all high quality equipment,
Sure.
In whether it's cameras or microphones or I don't even know. They probably have like, I don't know what else, but I know they've got that
A
stuff.
lot of stuff.
Yeah. And going there, and the people there who work there will talk to you about really anything you need. And they're not even like, if you're going to come back to buy something, they're okay with that. You can even call them and ask. So I pretty much just did my research and then also tried to get opinions and talk to other people who were already using equipment and such to understand what actually would work for me. And so that was when I finally bought my equipment. That was probably like 2017 or 2018. And I didn't end up launching my podcast until 2020 because so much goes into it. And also I was super busy working, and I was thinking of banking content, recording content, banking it, editing it, and then releasing it all at once, which I did end up doing for the first season. But now with my second season, I'm all in. So I'm doing it. I'm doing it. It's being released every single week, even though it'll still probably for now be released in seasons. And I could give more clarity to that if you want, but it just ended up taking me a while to actually go from, the first step to the first step of releasing. So I finally got my equipment, which was 4 microphones, recorder, the wires. And then after that, I got more extensions for my wires. I got like my little stands, and I had to return the first stands. I didn't like those, there's some trial and error.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so that's like the technical side. But then the other sort of technical side is doing research into what hosting platform you want. And now this might be a little bit different with Spotify coming and being like such a huge part of the game now. But from what I've always understood from all the research I did then and up until, probably end of 2019, is that you need a hosting site to be able to, and that's one place where you pay. I think some of them are free, but generally you pay like $15 a month, $20 a month. You can even pay as little as like 5 or 10, depending on which platform. And this is where you actually upload your content to, and it blasts out to all of the platforms that you might want your listeners to I guess you would call it stream on, listen on. And so that took me a while to learn. And then there's the figuring out your logo. Like, I'm not a graphic designer, but I've learned to have a bunch of hats and,
exactly.
Canva, or start teaching myself Final Cut Pro, etc. So that's kind of the overall gist of
absolutely
those technical logistics.
So I want to talk about the last thing you just talked about with the logo, wearing the different hats. I've been wearing so many different hats for so long, whether it be the video editor or the production manager, or like just there's so many different things. You know what I mean? Like the tech guy, where I don't know anything about the tech, but I got to figure it out, otherwise it's not going to work. You know what I mean? So yeah. I'm curious, or even like you said, the logo designer. In working, so for example, your podcast, or even just in work in general, what have you found? I'm trying to phrase this in the best way possible. What have you found is the best way, like, or some of the troubles or benefits of working all by yourself or with a group of people? And like, for example, the reason I'm asking is I like essentially working it by myself, because I like doing the logo myself, because I have a deadline that I can get done. Otherwise, I'm waiting 3 weeks for some guy to send me a demo that I don't like, that I have to wait another 3 weeks for. And I'm just curious on your experience with that, because I know you went from like working a corporate job to now something essentially more like on the podcast is a bit more of yourself. So, I'm sure you worked in teams there, but
yeah. And I've had several different jobs, so I've been able to see, and some of them simultaneous, not all of them, but so I've been able to see how different people are doing different things. I mean, I was not working in the capacity of one podcast, but still you can kind of apply, you can see how certain companies are doing certain things that may still teach you something about what you're doing. But I mean, what I like about doing my podcast is I own this thing, so it's going to look and sound how I want it to look and sound. So it's great to have that creative control. I think working on a team is amazing too. And it just depends on what you're working on. I've
Sure.
never worked on a team for my podcast, so I don't even know what that would look like. I would love for it to evolve that way, because I do love working on a team. And I believe in using everyone's strengths to the benefit of whatever you're working towards. So I like both, but it's also hard to do it all on your own, because like I'm not a graphic designer. So me figuring out how to make my logo is, utilizing my first logo was with my best friend, and she just was better at certain little
Yeah.
websites that can help put this together, put a logo together. So she helped me do that. But then you can also use, like, right now I'm probably going to test this out with Fiverr. So there's different websites and
True.
stuff that you can use and hire someone for pretty cheap most of the time, to help make your graphics. But also, like, Canva is the best,
I use Canva for everything.
it's the best. You can essentially make your own graphic for your podcast right there if you want.
Absolutely.
So there's pros and cons, but I think the biggest pro is that you make yourself so incredibly valuable by having to learn how to be, the
Absolutely.
sound person, the graphic designer, the video editor, the audio editor. So I'm very grateful for it, but it can literally be like a full-time job.
Absolutely, 100%. I couldn't agree more. So,
Yeah.
what are some of the experiences you found that like you weren't expecting to come up when you started your podcast? Good or bad, just experiences that you just would have never guessed.
Huh. Um, I'll talk about music. Like, I really want to put music into my podcast, but I need to do more research into that realm, because there's so many music licensing
Hmm.
barriers that need to be respected. So I feel like in a sense, I think my podcast can sound better, but if with music added, um, but I'm not educated enough in that realm to know what I can and can't do. So that's definitely a challenge, but also that's a challenge that I just need to do a little more research into. So um, also things like creating a little, like, jingle sort of intro,
Hmm.
an intro that, like, I have an intro on every show, but they're all different. They're specific to that show. But what I'm working on now is kind of putting together one that could be used for every show,
Hmm.
like, um, this is so silly, but like how SpongeBob always had SpongeBob SquarePants, it's
Exactly.
consistent with every
Exactly.
show.
Exactly.
So that's another, but these are not, I mean, I guess they could be hard things or not. It just depends on how you view them and what you do to figure them out. But those are two relevant things. Things that have been easier. I mean, I just love talking to people, so that's probably the least hard part of it for
Yeah.
me. Is
I agree with that. It's cool to meet so many different doing something similar. It's very cool to just have the opportunity to meet all these really really interesting people, and you
and
being
learn
one of the
from
people on the yeah exactly yeah I feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I get to ask these questions that I have questions about, or
it. Yeah,
people that are farther along in their career, or have a different career, and I'm like, oh, I've always wondered this, or I want to know how to do this or this or that, and so I'm like literally over here like taking mental notes, like, okay, I got to do this and got to do this, and so it's a really cool experience. So how many episodes do you have?
as of today, it's 19. So I had 10 in my first season, and I was so busy with work,
Hmm.
and so I ended up waiting way too long to release my second season. And like I said, I'm all in. I'm figuring out my life, but one thing that I know is that I want this podcast, and there's no option but for it to be successful. So um, that will never happen again. And um, yeah, so I have 19, and hopefully sooner than later I'll have hundreds and thousands. But
Amen to
yeah,
that.
but I release one a week, so we could just do the math there and figure out when I'd be at that place.
Absolutely, that's cool. Oh, maybe we'll get to a point we do 2 a week.
Yeah, maybe. Actually, that's not a bad idea. I've considered that too.
It's twice the amount of work usually, but
Yeah.
So, how do you end up finding the guests for your podcast? Is it actually pre-question to that? Are your guests all in person, or do you do Zoom?
So with COVID, I started doing Zoom, like so much of the world. Before that, they were all in person.
Okay.
So now it's a little bit of a mix, and yeah, so now it's a mix.
Sure. And then how do you end up finding the guests for your podcast?
It's really just me talking to people and hearing different stories and being like, you want to be on my show? You know, it's really just me feeling like, oh, you sound cool. I would love to talk to you.
Sure.
Or if I already know someone and I've thought of them, like, for example, I think maybe episode 6 of season 2, I'm forgetting exactly which one it is, but I had this woman, Winnie, on my podcast, and she, to give a very short gist of what her story is, she has she's had surgery with no anesthesia. She fell 100 feet off of a cliff and survived, and was thrashing around speaking Gaelic when she didn't know she knew Gaelic. And she knows that because her husband happened to have been taking Gaelic classes. Otherwise, they never would have known what she was speaking. She waited 27 hours to be rescued, like medically rescued, because she was in such a remote area. She ended up becoming a leg amputee, like just crazy story. But to answer your question, using that as an example, is this is an 83-year-old woman now. When we recorded, she was 82. And I remember growing up, my mom's best friend had mentioned that her friend had undergone surgery with no anesthesia. So like, I just randomly, like, I always had that in the back of my mind. At some point was like, I would love Winnie on my show. So then I pursued my mom's best friend, and she connected me with Winnie, etc. Other than that, it's things like that, or just people I know that I'm inspired by, or people who have told me about other people that I'm inspired by. And then it's just asking.
Yeah, it's a lot of asking.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think the biggest thing is, not learning not to be, I mean, one of the things I've learned is just learning not to be afraid of the no, because the worst thing that happens is somebody just says no, and it happens a lot. I don't know if it happens for you, but it happens for me a lot.
Yeah, I think where I'm at right now is like, if anything, my editing is kind of like, I have a few shows banked. So I'm not having that, but I totally get that too. Like with artist interviews, and like in college, I started doing interviews with artists, and of course you would get no's, or you would just get ignored, or sometimes you would get yeses. Like I ended up interviewing the Yin Yang twins in college. Like, I didn't have any business necessarily asking them, but also they said yes. So
exactly.
Gotta try.
Exactly. That's cool. You never know who's going to be open, which is pretty wild. Like, it is very, the funny thing that I've experienced with this, and I don't know if you've experienced this in your interviewing career, whether it be in college on your radio show or now with the Saige Jones podcast, is like, some people that have like, you would never expect to say yes are like, yeah, absolutely. And then some people that like really like, you'd be like surprised that they'd like wouldn't say yes, or like, oh, I'm too good for that. And I'm like, hold on a sec, this guy who's like way up here is like all for it, and you who's just starting off is too cool for a podcast like this or whatever. It is very interesting to see like the dynamics of people and how they function as just people.
Yeah. And you know what, even I'm like a kind of good example of that. Not that I ever told you no, but at the time when you had asked me to be on your show, I was so swamped with life and work, and I think it was kind of like yes, like touch base with me in a few weeks kind of thing, and it never happened. And now I have more time, and I was like, let me actually follow up on this, so I think everyone, like, that can be so annoying if people are just saying no just to say no or without considering it. But also people have, I don't know. I think I could also guess that a lot of people who are sort of on the come up are maybe they have a day job and they're nervous to say
Yeah.
something wrong, or I think that's like a very big thing, especially like some of my friends are
Yeah.
hilarious, amazing humans who, if I just turn the mic on, it just like feels scarier. So that could be one reason why they
Sure.
freeze up. Or people are, you know, nowadays you have to be careful with what you say and stuff. So
It's
people might,
crazy, yeah.
but someone who's up here might be like, oh, I'm good. You know, I've been through this. So
That's a good point. That's a great point. You know, like especially like you said, like on the come up, not even knowing what to say because you're afraid that this is going to be taken the wrong way. And you know how many times I put my foot in my mouth, you know, on a live stream or filming a video, like because I don't edit a lot of my videos, especially these podcasts that I don't edit at all. I just clip them out. And then get clips from them, but like I like the rawness of them, and I like the ability. Personally, I can put out more content if I don't edit my content. Essentially,
I get it.
mean? So, I'm more of the more mentality than the quality mentality. But even quality is subjective. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the podcasts that I listen to are just straight like they don't do anything. And then like the funny thing is like the camera will die and they'll like you'll hear them talking about the camera dying. They'll be like, oh, that camera died, so just look over here and we'll fix that in a set. Like it's just you don't even, it's funny, you know what I mean? But it's I guess it's a new style, but yeah. So
different folks.
What was that?
I said different strokes for different folks.
It's totally true. Absolutely. So what are you most excited for coming up with your podcast?
Just growing. That's one of the things that is my biggest goal, is just to continue growing. And what I want is, I think people sometimes hesitate to give feedback. I'm always like, tell me what you liked, what you didn't like.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm still at a place where all of that matters, and I even when it doesn't necessarily matter, I will still listen to not that it'll ever not matter, but I think when people have figured out what works, they might be less interested in that sort of feedback. But for me, I think I always will be, because that's how you keep growing and get better, listening to the people who listen to you, you know?
In my experience and my minimal experience, we'll say, but I'd say medium experience.
Don't discredit yourself.
Yeah, I'd say medium experience. I've seen a lot. I've spoken to a lot of people and speaking and seen a lot of people and watched a lot of people, and the people that I have noticed continue to grow and they all have the same track record essentially. Like they all say the same things, they all speak the same way, and I'm noticing it, especially in these interviews. Like you can just see there's a certain type of mentality that people have, and one of the things that caught my like that perked that when you mentioned like it's going to happen kind of thing. It's like it will happen mentality. Like there's no you said there was no alternative. It's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like that's a lot. You notice these people that actually build something great, they all have said and say the same thing. You know, because that first of all, you need that like audacity to like, because there's so much opposition against it. It's stinking hard, you know, to build anything like that, especially like in the creative realm where you're creating something. Like there's so much, like people make fun of you because like, oh, whatever, you know, like maybe if it takes a while to start off, you know, and there's like nobody's listening for a long time, and like that, even that against yourself, even if nobody knows, even if people assume it's going great and nobody knows that there's one listener, you know what I mean? Like, you know, and like in your head you're like battling that, so like it's hard. But the people that still have this like, no, it will happen one day, are the people that are able to, I think, to persevere through that, you know what I mean, and kind of be like, all right, this sucks at the moment that nobody's listening at the, you know, or whatever, like, but I know that one day it will. But another thing that you mentioned is the aspect of be open to feedback. There are so many people that I'm like they don't want to hear it, or they think that they know what they're doing and they don't. And it's like, I'm the same way. I'm like, tell me everything. I want to know everything, because I like if you think this could be better, even if it's, but as long as you're not being a jerk about it, you know what I mean? Like, I want to know all the feedback I can get. Tell me you don't like how my song sounds because of blank. I want to know, you know, tell me that this video could have been better because of blank, or, you know, I completely relate to a lot of that. And it's interesting to see that those a couple of common threads between a lot of the people that actually make something. So I'm excited to see where the podcast goes.
Yeah. And some people will tell you like, I've gotten, like, some of my family has said, like, oh, we would like the episodes to be shorter, whereas other people are like, this isn't long enough. So that's confusing then, because then you're like, well, who do I listen to, you know, or do I just keep doing what I'm doing until I get more feedback? Like, but there's so many more things like that I want to hear about, you know. So
those things are so interesting, like feedback where like they're super, you know, split. It's the complete opposite. It's longer, shorter kind of things, and like you'll never really know the answer to that one, I feel like, you know. But I feel like there are things like that. There are workarounds that you could do where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe I film for how long are your episodes usually?
I would say they're average about maybe 55 minutes.
Okay. So yeah, so of that, I feel like there's probably like 6 or 7 main topics. So then I like the Joe Rogan mentality where like his podcasts are so long that like the chances of me, unless I'm really really interested in who he's talking to, like the chances of me hearing that whole interview are very slim.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I love the fact that he does these 12-minute clips or 5-minute clips because I am highly likely to finish that whole thing, but highly unlikely to finish, you know, a 3-hour interview.
When you're referring to his 12-minute clips, are you talking about the JRE clips on YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
Is that actually his?
I have no clue, but it has like millions of subscribers, so
I
hope it is.
I hope it is too, but with his new deal with Spotify, I don't know if...
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that could actually be him. I'm not sure. But credit to Joe Rogan and people like Alex Cooper on Call Her Daddy. Do you know Call Her Daddy?
I know of her. Like, I know that she was with Barstools for a while, and then she just left for Spotify, right?
Yeah. Cheers to people like that who are just freaking paving the way in podcasting and just like they really inspired me all the time. And we need people like that, you know, like podcasting is uncharted to some degree. Podcasts have been around for way longer than people think, but
it's true.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to people like the two of them actually, like they're and like Charlemagne and DJ and Angela, like they all have so many people with amazing podcasts that just inspire me.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting point you made that they have been around for a long time, but it's starting to become less and less weird. I feel socially weird, or let me rephrase that. It's becoming more socially acceptable, where it's like people, when you hear people be like 5-10 years ago, people would be like, oh, I listen to a podcast. You're like, what's a podcast? You know, or a society would be like that. Now you hear a 25-year-old guy that just got out of college who's like, oh yeah, I listen to these 3 podcasts when I go to the gym. And like that's like the social norm now, and it's very interesting to see where society's going. Because if you said that you were starting a podcast 5 years ago, people would be like, "Why?" But now, you know, it's very interesting to see. But there's still not as less people than you would assume starting them. I don't know a ton of people that even take time to start them, but everybody listens to them.
Yeah. So as far as the example with like 5 years ago, so if you know certain people 5 years ago would have been like, good for you, like hell yeah, you're getting in early. Still not as early as some people, but other like the problem, my guess is the majority of people would be like, what's a podcast, you know? But you like, because the podcasts were definitely on my radar 5 years ago.
Mine too, I agree, but the average person, I feel. Well, that sounds super. Not what I said.
And I think what you're trying to say is like what I just said. With the majority of people, maybe would have been like, "Huh, what's a podcast?" Yeah. But we don't know. Like, we don't know the numbers, you know. Yeah. I was gonna say something else and I forget.
But... Well, that's fine. When I say the average person, you and I are more in that tech realm where we're more of the like searching for the next big thing and like So. That's what I was saying. The average person that is not creating, essentially, just a consumer.
Yeah.
I feel like they weren't talking about that a while ago.
And I know what else I was going to say. I was going to say that I feel like I do hear more and more people are starting podcasts more in the celebrity realm. Sure. But sometimes I hear, you know, other folks who are not even in, you know, working in media or anything. And that's cool. But also from doing a podcast, like part of me, now that I'm just kind of speaking out loud, would be interested, those people who I have heard who are not in media or anything, who are starting podcasts. I wonder what percentage of those people follow through with it. versus don't, because so much goes
Or
into
make
it.
more than like 5 episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Curious question for you. What makes a good podcast? In your opinion?
As a listener, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess it kind of would be both. I guess it depends on what kind of podcast you're listening to. Like if you're, a lot of Gimlet podcasts are very produced, and Gimlet is now, I believe, owned by Spotify, are very produced. They go down and do a ton of research and go down this like rabbit hole of stories, and you got the music and you got the different voices and all of that. And then there's other ones like a Call Her Daddy, which is a sex podcast. But for Call Her Daddy in particular, I think what makes that one so good is A, people like hearing about sex. B, people like that she's so open. And C, she's just confident and weird. Like, she'll come on there and be like, "What's up, daddy gang? It's your single father." And she's got all these different voices and such, but hers isn't very produced, not in the sense of like where you've got layers of music and all this stuff. It's her. So
yeah.
I think it depends on the kind of almost like genre of podcast. I'd say personality, also production, if it's applicable in that sense. And ultimately, I think it's the content. If the content is good, then of course I want to listen. But it just totally depends, because there's so many different niches, so many different interests. So it depends. Like, what's his name? The guy from The Parent Trap, I'm pretty sure. Dennis Quaid. Quaid. I think Dennis Quaid. Is he from The Parent Trap? I think so. Anyway, he hosts a pet podcast. It's literally, I think, called The Pet Podcast. And I never would have expected that from him. But
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either until I found out, and obviously, but like I'm very into animal rescue and just being kind to animals and everything. So somehow I ended up learning about his podcast, but that's just like such a niche, so
sure.
That's my opinion, is that there's so many different ways that podcasts could be good, but ultimately the content needs to be good, like regardless.
Yeah, which is such a broad answer, but like in the sense of like it's so hard to like what is good content. Well,
Who's listening?
Exactly. That's a great point. But it's a question I like to ask because I like you being somebody that creates podcasts. I've had actors here on the channel, and I was like, what makes a good actor? Like, what is good acting? It's just interesting to hear people's different opinions on what is good in being an industry in the industry and industry professional. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
and let me be clear, I'm still freaking learning.
Sure.
I'm only on my season 2 of this, so these are my answers for where I'm at now. A year from now, 5 years from now, it could be very different.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And hopefully they are, honestly, because that means you're growing and changing.
Yeah, evolving.
What would you say, like, if the opportunity comes one day, do you like the idea of selling to Spotify, or do you like the idea of staying independent, and why?
Ooh, good question. I think it depends on where I'm at with my listenership, and what I would be offered as far as promotion, to help elevate. But definitely open to that, because those power players have done huge things for a lot of artists. I think the 2 places I would be interested in discussing that with would be Barstool and Spotify. I just think that they've both done great. I think Spotify is becoming a huge player in the podcast game.
Sure, they have been for a while, for sure.
Yeah, and Barstool has done a lot of great things in the podcast realm, but there's also so many other great companies. So I would definitely be open to it. But of course, you want your creative control. But
sure, that's a big thing.
The answer is yes, totally.
That is an interesting perspective, especially what you said with like the marketing behind it. Because I don't love the idea of signing to a record label. I like the idea of being super independent and doing it all myself. And I just have that bit like love for business. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I could see the alternative for like a podcast, and I don't know if it's different or not, but like when they put you on the front page of Spotify, like because Spotify owns it, or is a distributor of it. You know what I mean? I don't know if they own it technically, but regardless, you know, like that's a different story kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like if Spotify were to be like, hey, we want to buy some or like rent Jacob Restituto's music, that's a different story. You know what I mean? Then like if like Columbia, who still has to go to Spotify because they're not in any relationship, and Columbia can still be told no by Spotify. Well, then you know what I mean. Like, but it is interesting. But then you're still selling it, and it's like Spotify could end up being in a year being like, sorry, we're just gonna shelf it. You know what I mean? And then you're stuck. You know. So it is a very interesting debate.
Yeah, it is, and the comparison with music is interesting too. Yeah, but I ultimately, like, speaking to your specific question, like my answer is yes, I would totally consider that, because these are, it's kind of like a franchise, you know, like franchises are franchises because, like, let's say you know, a 7-Eleven or like a Quiznos or something, or a Subway.
A Quiznos, like, I haven't heard of those for a long time.
But they, you know, the point of franchise is that they have done it. They know that this business model works. True. So that's why they keep making more and more, and then you can buy into one. So I just feel like my answer is yes, because these people know what works and what doesn't. But you have to do your research and have the right conversations and
be happy in the deal. Essentially, as long as you're happy in the deal, then it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah,
you know, which is super fascinating. But so wrapping it up, what is one thing that people, if you want to tell people, like, this is my podcast in one sentence, 2 sentences, and like what you would want them to take away from you and what you do, what would that be?
One word?
No, 1 sentence. Let's do one sentence. Like okay, let's do a word. I like that idea. That's a cool idea. But then let's also do a broad.
The sentence in my mind went to word.
Well, it's the common one is word. So like, let's do that. That's a cool idea first.
Kind of a takeaway is, what comes to mind first is inspiration.
Okay, cool. I like it. Now, in elongated, why?
Because we're figuring it out, and we, you know, not everyone wants the mansion, you know, but we all, I think I could speak for the majority of people, I should say, we want to figure out how to be happy, whether it's, you know, with our mental health or with our career success or just with personal challenges. And so this is a place where you can get a little bit of inspiration in all of those realms, and motivation and positivity, and that ain't hurt nobody.
Absolutely. I love it. I think that's great. So last question that I have for you is what do you personally, this is kind of like, I'm just from my own curiosity, what are you personally doing to kind of get your podcast out there, in the sense of like, how are you promoting it, trying to grow it?
So that I'm figuring that out. You know, I'm figuring out whether I want to, you know, test out ads and such. And that's kind of TBD for me. But my focus right now has just been amplifying my promo assets. So teaching myself, advancing my skills with Final Cut Pro. And like most recently, I learned how to cut for reels specifically, because, you know, Instagram is pushing reels so much. So if you use reels, they're probably going to reward you, their algorithm and everything.
I love that you're thinking this way. That's exactly how my mind thinks. I love it. But yeah.
So I'm kind of like taking it very step by step in that realm. But my current focus is really just promo assets and getting those right. And of course, you always need to get the podcast right, you know, the actual podcast. And also it's connecting with other people like you know, other people who have podcasts and such, because I think what people in LA do really well is, especially in the creator influencer world, is they see the value in all coming together and connecting. One person posts about the other person, and that they bring each other up, you know? So I think it's also, you know, being on other podcasts, sharing, whether it's talking about your podcast or talking about just a random topic, you know, being able to say, you can follow me at Saige Jones Podcast, or just on any platform where you get your podcast, listen to, just type in Saige Jones Podcast with an I, Saige, you know, like these things, connecting with people and being on other people's platforms. Even if, let's say you had 2 listeners and I had 2 listeners. Well, you know what? Your 2 listeners are now going to become, I mean, my two listeners are likely to now become your 2 listeners,
exactly.
You know?
So now we both have 4.
Yeah.
Exactly.
4. Yeah.
So I couldn't agree more. On a quick side note, have you heard of later.com? I highly recommend them for, like you mentioned, like the promo stuff. It's a great, I personally use them. This is not sponsored, but if they would love the sponsor, I wouldn't be but no. I actually use them pretty frequently. You can dump a whole bunch of content in there, and then you can schedule it to post on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Pinterest, and now even TikTok, which is really cool. So like you could schedule. I don't function well where it's like I know I have to post Instagram today. I can't. I forget. I push it off. So just spending 2 hours dumping all of it in there, scheduling it out for the week or the month or whatever, the 3 days or whatever you do, and then just having it post like that's how I function.
What does that cost? I'm guessing that's a subscription, right?
It is, but there's a free model where it's, I think you can do 30 posts in a month. So which would I think be a 1 post a day, I think. But then you can pay if you want to post like 3 or 4, because you can even schedule like Instagram stories and stuff. So like obviously like a 3-part story is 3 posts, for the day, for the month, or for the day. So, but yeah, I would try the free version.
Yeah, and what does it cost when you pay?
There's a couple different tiers. There's like a $7 a month, I think, or $9 a month. Then there's like a 15 maybe, and then.
Yeah, this also goes back to, I know we're about to wrap up, but talking about like learning like on the technical side, even things like this, are just very helpful and important, and also learning about all of the different platforms.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's super important in the sense of like I learn things from you, and then it's just these conversations I think are so important, because then we both learn things, and hopefully the people that end up watching either now or later can be like, oh, see, that's the goal. Like one of my biggest goals as an artist is like, of course, I want to make it to the top, right? Like that. But then while I'm going on my way to the top, I want to document as many things as I can, because I want to bring as many people there with me. You know what I mean? Because there was no tool. There's no map to get there, you know what I mean? And maybe that's for a reason, but like I want to create some sort of map that won't work exactly. Like it's not going to be a template. Okay, if I do exactly what Jacob Restituto did, then I'll be his. It's not going to work. But it's like, oh, I could take that idea. I could use later.com. I could use that Saige's podcast platform, or it's like, and then you become, person C now takes from Jacob Restituto, takes a little from Saige Jones, takes a little from this, takes a little from that, and then becomes their own person, But I want to document as much as I can, so that's one of the things that I really actually enjoy talking about and learning from, because then I start doing it myself, and then
totally. I think you're really gonna like probably 3 of my upcoming episodes, and it's interesting to hear. I'll be talking to a few, one dancer, 2 singers, and one of the singers actually is she busks in New York City, which cool. is like the going
the street performers,
but just talking to them about what, like, similar to this, but very much in the like what is working and what is not working kind of thing. And some of the things that they said were like pretty, not all of them were similar, but in some respects, hearing what like worked and didn't was like similar, and it's just interesting to see how certain things are common threads. I'll send them to you when they release, because
please,
find them helpful.
Absolutely. When do your episodes release? What day?
Mondays. Today.
Sounds good. What's today's episode?
Rodwave. Rodwave is an artist. He's
like
got
the rapper, right?
Yeah, he's got over 4 million Instagram followers and over 8 million.
He's like crushing it lately. How did you get him on a podcast?
I know people.
Well, if you want to help me know people, that'd be sweet.
Yeah, well,
he's been like trending on like YouTube for like since 2020. Like every time I go to the YouTube trending page, he's trending on YouTube.
And his YouTube just like kicks ass. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. I want to check that one out.
Thanks. So, I also just released you can get the audio on either anywhere you listen to your podcast, or I also released the video on my YouTube channel. So
perfect. Oh, I have all the links in the description except for YouTube channel. So I'm gonna I'll link that in after. But yeah. So for people that are watching, you can just type like you have Sage and there's Sage's Instagram. There's also the podcast Instagram and then the podcast link. Do you have like a smart URL where it can send them like to all of the different URLs?
Yeah, I have a link tree. So
yeah, can you send that to me?
And I'll put that I will. And it's pretty much everywhere is just SAIGE Jones or Sage Jones podcast. Like YouTube is just Sage Jones, but everywhere else is Sage Jones podcast.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, if you could just hang out for 2 more seconds, I want to thank everybody that did make it this far in the podcast. You guys are the true ones making it the whole way through. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for if you end up watching this after the fact. But I want to thank you and hope you have a great day. Thank you for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to check